Well, we're here mainly because this is the centenary, but it really goes back to J and T Davy. Eugene worked here. That's my father and your grandfather. James had done his apprenticeship for stockbroking. He was just about to set up his own business. So in 1929, Eugene qualified as an apprentice, and then they had to make up their mind what were they going to call the firm. So why not call it J and E Davy, James and Eugene Davy?
Tell me a little bit about James and Eugene as brothers.
Although they had the same education, James was kind of a little bit more serious and a little bit more intellectual, whereas Eugene would have been more sporting. But James went on to have an extraordinary, successful career as a businessman.
I think I probably came in 1963, 64, and Joseph maybe a year or two later, and then we began to take on all the new team, Kieran McLaughlin and then David Chewbottom and so on. That was, to my mind, the exciting period when there was all sorts of new activities. We realised there was another activity that was proving very profitable, and that was to manage private money.
Dermot Walsh came in to set up that. He's still in Davies. He's been a wonderful mentor to so many people in Davies. And he, in turn, a few years later, brought in Brian McKiernan.
We dealt with nearly every chief executive in the country, and that was part of our calling card, that we had a personal friendship.
Throughout the 70s, Davies had emerged from being a private client broker to being mainly an institution broker. That meant they were dealing in Irish bonds and Irish equities with major institutions, but it was business that was dominated by Irish clients and very few overseas clients. The initial, if you like, initiative in Davies was to build an international base for Irish bonds, and that was largely led by Tony Gary. And eventually, in about 1983, 1984, I think, the investment arm of Deutsche Bank, DWS, finally took a position in Irish government bond. It went from a position where Irish Life was by far and away the dominant client to Davy to, much, much broader spread of clients right across the world. The internationalisation of the equity market came much later, and that was led by Paul Burke. And I moved from the bond business into the equity business at that stage. And myself and Paul travelled the world trying to convince guys to buy Irish equities. If you look at the Davy business now, it's a very different business than the one I joined.
Ireland in the early 90s, the economy wasn't doing so great, very low economic growth. I refer to the firm as Davies because that's what the firm was known as, back in the 90s. I think sometime in the noughties, the firm acquired marketing skills and rebranded. It became known as Davy. So one of the features of the 90s was, as I said, the privatization agenda, which saw some previously state companies floated on the stock market, and it was a good market for new issues.
At the time, it was a very high-touch job in that there was very little tech. Companies used to submit their announcements to us for release to the market, but they didn't come in via email. They came in on a CD-ROM in a sealed envelope, and then would have to be retyped, re-prepared with a callback then done on the content of it. If you were going out to meet a company with a view to pitching to them and you wanted to uncover more of their information, we had a physical library that was staffed, and the librarian had to print off copies of the announcements and put them into folders. The market was kind of larger then in number of companies listed than now. Davies typically was broker, financial advisor to about 70% of those companies. So at any given time, you might have had 3 or 4 live transactions. They were the most diverse share registers of Irish companies. Davies was a key part of that in introducing Irish companies to international capital. So whether that was Texas, New York, LA, Frankfurt, Paris. And that capital then enabled Irish companies to grow internationally. People who worked here were forged in fire in that it was a very challenging environment, very high standards were expected. People worked extraordinarily hard. So within 5 years of joining, I was the director in corporate finance and I was running, multi-billion transactions. So it was a very exciting company to work with, to feel you were at the forefront of corporate Ireland and being involved in many seminal transactions that didn't just have a large footprint in Ireland, but were high profile internationally.
I joined Davy in 1996. In truth, a very different Davy and a very different Ireland. Ireland had nothing of the wealth that was to come its way over the coming decades. The wealth business was just getting going, really. That said, it was a very exciting time to be in the business. You could feel there was an atmosphere of positivity in the air. Then Davy did what Davy does. It innovates, it backs people, and it puts clients at the centre of everything with investment. The global financial crisis had a big impact on Davy. Our clients were hurting. They needed a financial plan to help rebuild their wealth. And so overall, it helped us to get closer to our clients. We cut costs, but we didn't stop investing. The global financial crisis and the volatility that ensued helped actually spur us on to the next evolution of the private client proposition, going from an investment manager into a truly holistic wealth manager and embracing financial planning in a major way. We've had more than a few challenges over the years, but Davy has never run away. It's always leaned in and dealt with them face up.
I think we really all saw the opportunity of bringing two fantastic teams of people, the client base, the proposition together and creating something truly special in the Irish market. Of course, there was late nights and twists and turns on the road, and I think the thing that really kept us all going was that focus on the client. It's entrepreneurial, it's fast-paced, people care for each other, and it's a really, really warm environment to be part of.
Davy has been at the core of corporate Ireland for 100 years this year, and that just doesn't happen by fluke. Every individual client that comes into us, and again, whether they're institutional, whether they're corporate, or whether they're an individual, it's all about the long-term relationship that we have in place. We've had clients who have been with us through generations since the inception of Davy 100 years ago, and their families continue to be clients of Davy today. And I would hope that as we look to the next 100 years that will continue, that we will start to see those long-term relationships, intergenerational relationships, and that is really what my hope for the future. Davy has been around for 100 years and thrived for 100 years for one simple reason: the strength of our client relationships. And I just want to say thank you to all of our clients. Thank you for the trust that you place in us as a business.